Let's tackle a monumental task. Let's talk about tile entities. Alright, we find ourselves in IntelliJ once more, and in this tutorial we are going to create a tile entity. This includes a screen, a container, a tile entity, and a block. We're going to do all of it all in this tutorial. That's probably why the tutorial is the length it is. I don't want to make you afraid of tile entities. It's just that tile entities are quite complicated, and they can be even more complicated. I try to make it as compact as possible. I do have timestamps in the video so that you can jump around if you need to. However, I would definitely advise to go from start to finish rather than jumping around. You should maybe only jump back if you maybe missed something. The code for all of this is available in the description below, either in a GitHub repository, or there's also a gist with all of the individual files themselves as well. What is also available in the description below is this slide here, this cheat sheet, and this is the thing that we're going to actually go through right now. I kind of want to explain the idea of the tile entity here. And those are basically the four components that we're going to need. The first component that we are going to implement is the tile entity itself. Now, there's nothing really here because the tile entity is only a class that holds data. That's the idea that you can think about when you think about a tile entity. So what is a tile entity? It's actually just a class that holds additional data for a block. And the block, we've already seen how to create a custom block class. With a custom block class, we can then say, okay, this actually has a tile entity, and this block then creates the tile entity. You can also think of it that the tile entity belongs to the block that creates it, basically. And there's another thing, the container. The container gets created when we right-click the block, usually. So this is when you right-click a furnace, then the container appears. The important thing is the distinction between the container and the screen. The screen is literally just this image here. There's no functionality. The screen is literally only this image. I could replace it with all green, and then instead of the nice inventory and stuff, we would have just green in the background. The container would still work. And that's one of the main things that you need to try and understand, that the screen really is only the image, and the container is where the functionality of the inventory lies. I have separated this into 3 different colors here. The green here would be the tile entity inventory, and that is handled by the tile entity itself. So the 2 green slots here are handled in the container and the tile entity together. So the tile entity basically holds the data for the items that are in here, while the blue and the red, of course, you should know that is simply the in Minecraft inventory and then the hotbar. When we're creating this container, we actually have to specify the locations of each of those slots. Now, luckily, there's a few helper methods that we can use in order to make this a little bit easier for us, but that's actually one of the things that we need to do in this case. And the screen usually has a reference to the container. So if I want, for example, I have this lightning bolt here. If something happens in the container, then maybe I want to change this lightning bolt. This is also how the progress arrow works in the furnace, for example, in the vanilla furnace. So the container knows what the progress is, and then the screen displays it. So that's sort of the idea here. This was kind of a long overview. However, I really want this to be a comprehensive guide to the tile entity and for you to actually understand each of the individual parts. I'm going to try my best when we go through the code and we're programming in just a moment. But yeah, that's sort of the overview. Like I said, this image, of course, also available in the description below for download. And now without further ado, let's start by creating a new package inside of our tutorial mod package called TileEntity. And inside of the TileEntity package, we're going to create the class ModTileEntities, as well as the lightning channeler tile. So just like blocks should have the ending block, and items should have the ending item, tile entities usually end with tile. Now this will extend tile entity, this one from net Minecraft tile entity, and then what we need to do is we need to create a constructor matching super. All right, so let's think about this. The first thing that we need is we need an item stack handler. So private final item stack handler called item handler is equal to create handler. That is a method that we will implement in just a moment. The first thing that we want afterwards is a private final lazy optional of type item handler called handler, and this is equal to a lazy optional dot of, and then a supplier that simply returns the item handler. So what is happening here? The item stack handler is basically responsible for the inventory or the contents of the tile entity. So if I middle mouse button click, you can see this has a list of stacks, for example, as well as a few other methods that are exactly needed to manage an inventory. So the item stack handler you can think of as the inventory or the data component that stores the contents of a particular inventory. So when you open a chest, you put something in there, that gets saved in an item stack handler, and then you close the chest, and of course that needs to be saved somehow, and it is all saved in this item handler. The reason why we need this lazy optional here, this lazy optional we need for the capability that we're going to implement. So there are different capabilities that we can implement for tile entities, and there's an item handler capability that basically allows us, if we implement the get capability method, which we're going to do in just a little while, then that allows us to pump items into the block, as well as use a hopper, for example, to use on certain sides of the block. So the first thing that we're going to implement is the create handler. So private item stack handler, create handler, there you go. And that is going to return a new item stack handler. There you go. Now this will take a 2 in here, and then we'll actually make this an anonymous class. So with this, we're actually going to override certain things. The first thing that we're going to override is on contents changed. And the only thing that we're going to do here is mark dirty. The second thing that we want to override is item valid. So is item valid returns a Boolean value based on the slot and the item stack. So if I have, for our example, we're going to have 2 slots in the inventory. So in the tile entity, there's going to be 2 slots. And I actually only want glass panes to be able to be put in the first slot, and then the other slot should have amethyst and, for example, firestone. That's the only things I want to actually be able to be put there. And so what we can do is we can make a switch statement here. So this would be the switch slot. And then if it's case 0, so that would be the first slot, then we're going to return the stack.getItem is equal to items.glassPane. This will ensure that in slot 0, only glass panes can be inserted. And then case 1, return stack.getItem is equal to modItems amethyst.get, or stack.getItem is equal to modItems.firestone.get. And we'll also do a default, which is going to be returning false here, and then we don't need to return the super, and then this method is also overridden. Another method we're going to override is the get slot limit. This will simply return 1, because I only want one item to be input into each of these slots. So there's going to be 1 glass pane and then 1 amethyst, and then after we're doing some magic, so to speak, then this will turn into a firestone. That's the general idea. And then one last thing we're going to override is the insert item method right here. And this will simply do the following. This will simply say if item is not valid, slot stack, then we're going to return the stack. This will simply ensure that the isItemValid method is also correctly called. And if the item is not valid, we're simply going to return the normal stack. Otherwise, we are going to call the super method on the insert item, and the item will be inserted. Right, that's what we need to do for the item stack handler. So basically, there are some things that we wanted to override in here. In theory, all of these overrides are optional. However, what is really optional is the get slot limit, so that you don't have to necessarily do. The same goes for the isItemValid. You don't have to necessarily restrict this like this. There's also other ways that you can sort of restrict what items go into an item stack handler. However, in this case, that is actually going to be fine. And what we'll do is we'll actually close this so that the class is a little bit nicer to read. Right, next, let's create the capability. So get capability is the thing that we want to override, and we want to override it with the side right here. And this is actually a very easy method to implement. This is simply going to be if cap is equal to capability item handler .item handler capability, we're going to return handler.cast, like that. And that's actually all that we need to do. And you can also make this sided. So for example, that only on the right side of the block or the left side of the block you can insert or extract items. That is also something that you could do. We're not going to do this at this time because it is complicated enough as is. Right, we'll need to add 2 more methods. That is the read method and the write method. Now, both of those, as you can see, are using compound-NBTs. They are there to save the data after the world, for example, has been saved. So when we save the world, we have to save the data in this tile entity into NBT data, and then we can read it in once we load the world again. So this will be item handler.deserialize NBT compound NBT.getCompound INV. We're going to call this INV. And then here, what we're going to do is we're going to say compound.put with INV item handler.serialize NBT. And that's all we need to do for the read and the write method. So now the things that we put inside of the item, inside of the tile entity should remain there after we've closed out of the game, and going back in, those should remain there. Now, there are two more things that we need to add. One of the ones we can add immediately, that is a custom thing. So this is a public void lightning has struck method. Now, this method here is optional. This is one of the methods that we are going to put in to show a particular functionality of this block. This is not a part of every tile entity. I just want to make this very certain. This is something custom here. And the idea is that this will be called when we right-click the block and certain other things have happened. So this will be called when we are in a thunderstorm and we right-click the block. When the slots are filled with their respective items, then what I want to do is basically I want a glass pane to be put in the top slot, an amethyst in the bottom slot, and then when it actually is thundering, so that when there's a thunderstorm, I want to be able to right-click the block, and then a thunder will strike the block, and the amethyst will turn into a firestone. That's the general idea, and this is what we will implement here in this lightning has struck method. So a boolean has focus in first slot. I just call this focus. This item handler. So the item handler get stack in slot 0. So we're going to get the item stack in the first slot, and we're going to take a look. Okay, is the count bigger than 0? So is there even something in there? And if that's the case, then we're also going to see, okay, if this.item handler get stack in slot 0, if the item, so get item, is equal to items.glassPane. Now, in theory, this should always be true because we have in the item stack handler, when we created it, we have restricted it to only be glass panes, just making sure that this is also the case. And then we can copy this over and we can call the second one has amethyst in second slot. And this will be slot 1 and slot 1 here as well. And then this asks for mod items.amethyst.get. Now, if both of those are true, so if has focus in first slot and has amethyst in second slot, then we can do some really cool stuff. The thing that we're going to do is we're first of all going to delete the glass pane and the amethyst. So we're going to say item handler.get stack in slot 0 shrink by 1, because we know that there's only ever going to be one item in there. We can shrink it by 1. Same goes for the stack in slot 1. And then what we're going to do is this.item handler.insert item in slot 1 is going to be a new item stack mod items.firestone.get with a false for simulate. This will basically delete the glass pane and the amethyst, and we'll replace the amethyst with the firestone. That will happen when we call the lightning has struck method. It's going to take a while until we get there where we actually call it. One thing I do want to say is we could also create a new recipe type and actually create custom recipes for this as well. However, that is more advanced at the moment, and I really only want to show you the tile entity and what goes into the tile entities. With the custom recipe types, that's something for another day. Right now, before we will add the last thing here, we actually have to go into the ModTileEntities and create some stuff right here. So this will be a public static deferred register of type tile entity type, and then another angle brackets with a question mark in here. This is going to be tile_entities is equal to deferred register.create forge registries.tileEntities tutorial mod.modID. And of course, we will also add the public static void register method with the event bus, and we'll say tileEntities.register with the event bus. This will be called in the tutorial mod method after the mod blocks, so ModTileEntities.register event bus. Very important. And as you can see, I have also made a typo here. No worries. Right-click, refactor, rename, register. There you go. Right, and now we have to create the tile entity registry object. So public static registry object of type tile entity type of type lightning channeler tile. This is the lightning channeler underscore tile, which is equal to tile entities dot register. This is the lightning underscore channeler underscore tile, comma, and then a supplier of tile entity type. This is going to be interesting. So this is tile entity type dot builder .create, and this also takes a supplier. Now what we can do here is we can say lightning channeler type : new, comma, mod blocks, and now we don't have the mod block yet. We're gonna make that in just a moment. We're gonna call this already lightning underscore channeler .get .build null, and then right there. And then import the mod blocks here, and then that would be fine. Now this will throw an error at the moment because we have not yet created the block in the mod blocks class. This is totally normal. This is a very circular thing, because if we once again go back here, you can see that they all sort of relate to each other. The block, the tile entity, the container, and the screen, they all relate to each other in multiple ways. So this is why there's a little bit of circular logic in here. However, it still works. So if we now go into the block package, into the mod blocks class, we can simply get the hyacinth here, and for the time being we'll make this a block, and we'll call this the lightning underscore channeler, and then of course the same here, lightning underscore channeler, and then this only gets the abstract block properties right there. And we're gonna make this a little bit different actually. We're gonna make this not from but create with material.iron, and we'll just keep it like that for the time being. Right, so if we switch back to here, then you can see that all of a sudden we are getting an error. Now the reason we're getting an error here is because the lightning channeler tile entity doesn't have the right constructor. And that's the last thing that we want to add. We want to add a lightning channeler tile constructor with no parameter, and it's going to call this ModTileEntities dot lightning channeler tile dot get. So with this constructor, we are calling this constructor, and the constructor with no parameter is called right here. Then this error will resolve, this error will resolve, and this error will resolve. And in theory, the tile entity is now in game, but it wouldn't quite work just yet. There's a few more things that we need to do, and the next thing is going to be the container. So thinking back, the container are the individual slots that are inside of the inventory, and this will be referenced by the screen, but that's not going to be an issue. The container comes first, basically. It's also necessary that we have the container so that we can actually create it inside of the block. So next, lightning channeler container class. Now I will personally put this into a package called the container package. In vanilla, this is inside of inventory and then container. It really doesn't matter too much. You can of course follow that or just follow my lead here. First of all, we're going to have a ModContainers class, as well as the lightning channeler container. Let's first of all concern ourselves with the lightning channeler container. This is going to extends container. Very important, not Java AWT, but net Minecraft inventory container right here. And then we'll implement the method can interact with, and we'll also hover over and create a container matching super. Now the container will have 3 fields, all of them private and final. One of them is going to be a tile entity. This is going to be the, surprisingly enough, tile entity. We'll have a private final player entity. This will be the player entity, and a private final item handler. This will be the player inventory. So as you can see, the player inventory is handled by the container itself, while the inventory of the tile entity is of course in this tile entity here, and we're going to be able to access that with the get capability method that we have implemented in our tile entity. So first of all, we want to completely change this to first of all a public constructor, and then we want to change this in its entirety. The first one is going to be a window ID. Second thing is going to be a world, and we're going to have a block pause. Then we're going to have a player inventory called player inventory, and then we'll have a player entity called player. Let's import the block pass, hovering over it, Control A, Control Enter, and then world just the same, Control Enter. And then instead of having a type, we're going to need to put in the mod containers once again. We don't have that just yet, so we'll just have to work with that error for the time being, but no worries, we're going to fix that of course. This tile entity is equal to world.getTileEntity at the pause. We're simply going to say, hey world, at this position, is there a tile entity? If there is, put it in there. And of course there should be, because this position will always be the position of the block. And if the block has the tile entity, then all is going to be fine. Player entity is equal to player. And then this player inventory is going to be equal to a new INV wrapper player inventory. So I wouldn't be too concerned about this at the moment right now. This is simply a different way of looking at the player inventory. If we take a look at the player inventory, this is an inventory and an nameable, and we can sort of convert that into an item handler And the item handler basically has the ideas of the insert, the extract item. So that's all that we're really doing right here. Like I said, I wouldn't focus on that too much. There are, however, 3 methods, actually 4 methods that we're going to copy over. And so you will have to go into the GitHub repository or take a look at the gists that I've mentioned. And that is going to be at slot range, at slot blocks, and the layout player inventory, because those should always be the same. If we go back to the cheat sheet, you can see that, well, as long as the container here is always the same, the inventory will always be laid out the same. Now, in theory, you could lay out the inventory however you would like. You could also make it horizontal or vertical, or you could even make it diagonal if you really wanted to. Like, there's nothing stopping you from that. However, number one, user experience, that's just going to be a really bad idea. And second of all, it's usually always the same. So this is why we actually are going to copy those over. And then what we want to call is we want to call the layout player inventory with 8 and 86 for us. So what is 8 and 86? Well, for our screen, so now it's actually important that this lines up. The first pixel of our player inventory is 8 pixels from the left and 86 pixels from the top. So that is basically why we have 8 and 86 right here. So if you have custom screens and custom containers and all of that, you will need to get the pixel values from there. So that's very important. Then after we have laid out the player inventory, we can then say if tile entity is not null, then we can do some crazy stuff. And that is going to be tileentity.get capability. That's going to be a capability item handler.item handler capability. Then we'll say if present, I'm going to say h is the item handler, curly brackets. If that's the case, then what we want is we want to add some slots. And what we're going to do is we're going to add some new slot item handlers with the item handler h, index 0, position 80, and y position 31. Then we'll duplicate this line, Control D, and then we'll say index 1 and y position 53. So these positions, once again, if we take a look at our GUI, this is the position of the 0 index, and this is the slot with index 1, and the position is exactly 22 pixels below. So that's where those numbers basically come from. There's a few more things that we need to do. So in the canInteract method, we're going to return is within a usable distance, and we'll call the iWorld calculable, not .dummy, but of. Then we'll say tileEntity.getWorld. After the world, we're going to say tileEntity.getPass, and we'll close this, and we'll say player in, and then mod blocks dot lightning channeler.get. So once again, of course, this is available for download. If you don't want to type this out, this can be a little bit confusing here. And then there's one more custom method that I added. This is going to be the public boolean is lightning storm, and that's simply going to return tileEntity.getWorld that is thundering. So we're going to see whether or not the world is thundering, so whether or not there is a lightning storm. This will then later be called in the screen to basically show the lightning bolt either light up or not light up. Okay, and then one last method that I'm going to also copy over, and which I'm going to explain in just a little bit. So this is going to be a long method, as you can clearly see, and there's a lot of things that are in here, and I'm quickly going to try to explain. So first of all, credit goes to Dzeem07 here. They have made this, well, much easier than it usually is. The thing about this method is this transfer stack in slot method is called when you shift click an item into your custom inventory, into your tile entity. I could go through and explain this for half an hour, but I gotta be honest with you, it's not going to get us anywhere. We're just gonna copy it over. We're gonna thank Dzeem for being able to use this. You can also take a look at the GitHub repository here where I've got this from, and we're gonna say, okay, good, and never look at it again. This works and this is fine. The only thing that we need to modify is the TE inventory slot count. So this is the number of slots that your tile entity has. We know that we have added 2 slots, so we have 2 slots here. This is the only thing that you have to define. Anything else in here can stay exactly the same, and this will take care of the shift clicking, no problem. So that's one of the other things that is very important. And now the container is basically done. We can also just clean this up a little bit here, and then we can go to the ModContainers class. And inside of that, of course, we will need another public static deferred register, this time of type container type. And once again, with angle brackets question mark, there you go. And this is the containers. This is equal to deferred register.create forge registries.containers tutorial mod.modID, and then immediately let's add the register method as well. Register, even written correctly. That's a new one. event bus, and this will call containers.register event bus, and then we'll immediately call this in the tutorial mod class right here. So mod containers.register event bus. So that's very important that you add that as well. And then let's add the container. This is probably the most complex registry object. It is even more complex than the tile entity. This is a static final registry object of type container type of type lightning channeler container. This is the lightning underscore channeler underscore container, which is equal to containers dot register with the name lightning underscore channeler underscore container. And this will have a supplier of type I forge container type dot create. So what you're going to do is let's actually make it let's make it so we only have the opening parentheses, and then we'll make a opening parentheses, and then when we type in win, it's actually going to suggest us this, so we can autocomplete this, curly brackets, and then inside of here we want a block pause from data dot read block pause. We want a world called world equals to inventory dot player dot get entity world, and then we want to return a new lightning channeler container with the window ID, the world, the position, the inv inventory, and then inventory dot player, only with one parenthesis there. And then this should be 3 parentheses to close this. We'll import the world class, and that's it. Like I said, this is absolutely insane. This is, however, what we are going to need. So this basically registers the container, and we will now call this in here. So instead of saying type, we'll say mod containers dot lightning channeler container dot get. Now the container has been completed, so this is actually done. Same with the mod container class, so we can close both of those. The ModTileEntities is also done. The channeler here is also done, and the blocks, actually we still need to do something there, but before we do the block, first of all, let's do the screen. Referring once again back to our handy cheat sheet here, we remember that the screen literally is just this PNG. So the screen itself is actually not that complicated. There are some methods that we still need to call because we want to draw this screen. That's just the way that this sort of works, but it's actually all not too bad. So in our tutorial mod class, let's create a new package called screen. In vanilla, this would be under client GUI screen. I personally think screen is more than enough. But once again, the package organization really falls down to you, and if you have a team, your team. A new class in there, lightning channeler screen. This will be very interesting. This will extend container screen of type lightning channeler container. I know, it's absolutely crazy. We're going to hover over it and implement methods. We only need to implement the draw GUI container background layer method, and then we'll hover over again and create a constructor matching super. We'll have a private final resource location called GUI all uppercase, which is equal to a new resource location for tutorial mod.modID, and then we're going to have a string to textures slash GUI slash lightning underscore channeler underscore GUI.png, and we're going to add this texture in just a moment. That is basically exactly the same texture that we've seen on the cheat sheet here. So it's exactly this texture, which is of course also available for download in the description below. We want to also override the render method here, and this will call the this.render background with a matrix stack. Then we'll call the super.render matrix stack mouse x, mouse y, and partial ticks, and then also render hover tooltip, matrix stack, mouse x, mouse y. There you go. Now the draw GUI container background layer. What is going on here? Well, first of all, we're going to call render system.color4f with 1f, 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 and 1f. Then we're going to call this Minecraft.getTextureManager.bindTextureGUI. There you go. And then we will say integer. We're going to create a new integer. I is this.GUI left. So this will be the topmost left pixel of this GUI, and then pixel GUI top. This.blit matrix stack I j00 this.xsize this.ysize. So when we call this.blit, this always draws something on the screen. So what it will draw is something that starts at the top left corner, so 0, 0, and then what it's going to do is it's going to offset and have this size. So this is this looks more complicated than it actually is, and it's not actually that bad. This here actually simply draws the entire image, and if I actually show you the image in its entirety, so this is actually the real image. You can see that the size of the image should always be 256 by 256. And then whatever this size here is going to be the X size and the Y size. Now, in this case, it actually is the size that is already inside of the container, so that's fine. And then on the right here, you have place to, well, basically place some additional things like the yellow lightning bolt here, which will be overlaid on top of this lightning bolt. And that's exactly what we're going to implement now. So if container dot is lightning storm. So if there's a lightning storm, then we're going to draw this. So this.blit and then matrix tag, and then we're going to say I plus 82, j plus 9, 176 offset, 0 v offset, comma 13, comma 17. And with this, you might get a little closer to what is going on. The I and the j determines where this is drawn. The u offset and the v offset determines where you start on that image. So if I reopen the image, then what I can tell you is that the first pixel of this, the upper left pixel of this yellow lightning bolt is at position 176 and a 0. And the width from left to right is 13, and the height from top to bottom is 17 pixels. So this is basically how this blit comes together. And I understand that this still might be a little confusing to you. What I can always just advise, like I've said probably about 1,000,000 times already, try out a few things. Try out a few things here and just see if you can do some things. And I've also seen that I've forgotten a semicolon here. That's not good. Right, and that is the screen done as well. We still need to register that, but that's going to happen in a moment. First of all, let's go to our tutorial mod textures. And then in the textures folder, we're going to create a new folder called GUI or GUI. And we will drag in the lightning channeler GUI. Of course, make sure that this is written correctly here, because this is the resource location that it points to. So this, of course, has to match. And then the screen is done as well. The next thing that we have to do is inside of our tutorial mod class, we go down to the do client stuff method. And what we have to do is we have to call the screen manager dot register factory ModContainers dot lightning channeler dot get, and then comma, and then lightning channeler screen : new. So this registers the screen to the container so that the screen sort of has the reference to it. So it just registers everything. But sadly, we're not quite done yet. We have to now make a custom block class, but that is the last thing that we need to do, I promise. So inside of our custom package here, lightning channeler block. This simply extends block, of course, making sure that we choose the correct block here, and then create constructor matching super. There we actually don't need to change anything. There are two methods that we want to override immediately. That is the hasTileEntity method, and that's simply going to return a true because, well, it has a tile entity. And then we will also override the createTileEntity method. There you go. And that is going to return the following: ModTileEntities dot lightning channeler tile dot get dot create. Now with those two out of the way, now we can also override the onBlock activated method. That is, of course, the right-click method. And this is going to be one of the more complex methods, and we'll just go through it. So the first thing that we want to check is whether or not we are on the client or the server, and we only want to do something if we are on the server. So basically like this. If nothing happens down here, we can just return action result type dot success. And now here we are actually going to do some stuff. So a tile entity is equal to world in dot get tile entity at position. That should make sense. If I show all of the parameters, then we will see that this should make sense. And then I'm going to do one thing that is not necessary. This is going to be player dot is crouching. So when I say it's not necessary, what I'm saying is that you don't necessarily need this for every tile entity. You can also just keep this away and only use what we're going to have if we're not crouching. So, and this will be to check if the tile entity is an instance of the lightning channeler tile. This will make sure that whatever tile entity is at this position is also a lightning channeler tile. And if that is the case, then what we want is we want an I-named container provider called the container provider. And that's going to be equal to create container provider with the world in and the pass. And this is a method that has not yet been created. So we're going to say create method. And this is actually a method that we have to create ourselves. This will return a new I-named container provider. And then as you can see, we get an anonymous class basically. Here we have to get a display name. This will be a new translation text component screen.tutorialmod.lightning_channel. So this is the text that is displayed at the top left corner of the GUI. This is going to be a new lightning channeler container. And I'm actually going to rename those parameters because I hate it when they're called, well, some weird names there. Player entity, there you go. So we're going to say I world in. We're going to say pause. We're going to say player inventory. And then we're going to say player entity. Easy enough. Now, usually what you will probably see is that this is simply returned up here. So directly here, I think that having the create container provider there just makes it a little bit more readable in that case. And now the thing is that we somehow need to tell the client that, hey, we just opened this thing. So we're going to say network hooks.openGUI with the player.cast, which is going to be cast into a server player entity, and then comma container provider tile entity.getPass. So this is already implemented for us a way to open a GUI so that both server and the client know about it. Now, if this is not the case, that this is an instance of the lightning channeler, then we simply want to throw a new illegal state exception. I'm going to say our container provider is missing. And that's all that we're going to do. Now on to the fact that what happens if we are actually crouching. This is the sort of optional part, or the part where the particular tile entity comes in. So of course, we're still going to check whether or not the tile entity is an instance of the lightning spawner tile or lightning channeler tile. And then we're going to check if the world is thundering. Then we're able to do some stuff. And what I want to do is I want to spawn a lightning bolt. So entity type.lightningbolt.spawn. And then I'm going to say world in.cast to a server world. We're going to have a null here. We're going to have the player. We're going to have spawn this at the position. The spawn reason is going to be triggered, true and true. And now the real cool thing starts. Tile entity.cast. And we're going to cast this to a lightning channeler tile. If we're in here, then we know that this is definitely a lightning channeler tile. Then we can say lightning has struck. And the great thing about this is now that we are calling the lightning has struck. You can middle mouse button click. We're going to think back. If this is all the case, if we have a glass pane, if we have an amethyst in here, now the amethyst is going to turn into a firestone. So this is why I had this lightning has struck method. There is also another way that we can do this without calling the tile entity directly. We could also make a custom packets manager and send over a package. That would also work, however, because we are already on the server thread in this case, because we've checked that the world here is in the server world. This should also be totally fine that we are doing this in this case. Basically, these two lines, so the create container provider and the network hooks, this is basically what I meant with this here. The creates the new container. So if we right click this block, we're going to create this new container. The screen will then, of course, also be drawn in the background, and the container will be overlaid on top of that. And the block, of course, also creates the tile entity, as you have seen with the following in right here, right? ModTileEntities lightning channeler.get.create. So this is what I meant by creating the tile entity. Now, the last thing that we need to do is inside of the mod blocks class here, instead of calling this a new block, this is a new lightning channeler block. And then I know that this is sort of anticlimactic, but we also need to add the JSON files. Okay, I'm simply going to copy over the JSON files. They are normal JSON files. There's only one texture there, so one model as well. It's going to be fairly easy here. Block model, there you go, simply points to one texture, and then the item model simply points back to the block model. There it is. So, and then the last but not least, the texture as well. All of this is, of course, also available in the description below, either in the GitHub repository or for download. Right, now I'm actually fairly confident that I have not forgotten anything. Okay, I have actually forgotten something, and that is the lightning_channeler right here. And that's going to be the lightning channeler. And the same actually goes for inside of here, where we have this screen tutorial mod lightning channeler. That's also something we want to do, and then simply put in lightning channeler as well. So that is also something we need. And now let's see if it works. All right, we find ourselves in Minecraft once more, and let's see. The lightning channeler has been added to the game, so I will set it down, and then I will right click, and there we are. Now this is sort of overlapping with the lightning bolt. That's not an issue that we can of course fix. Now if I try to add some things in here, that doesn't work because there are very certain items that we have specified, so glass panes and the amethyst, of course. And if I now try to add an amethyst to the top, that doesn't work, but at the bottom it does work, but only one of them. Same with the glass pane, so that's pretty cool. Now I will actually change the weather to thunder, and if I change it to thunder, you'll see that we will shortly have this lightning bolt. There it is, and now we can actually crouch right-click, and it should spawn a thunder, and delete both of those items and turn the amethyst into a firestone. Okay, so that worked, and there it is, the firestone. So it has worked perfectly, and now I can sort of use the firestone to, set fire to stuff, or, like we've seen before, craft items with, and then it has been used. Yeah, so that actually works, and I can see I can just continue to do this, and this will continue to work. So that is pretty cool that this already works really well. Shift clicking also works, as you can see, so I can shift click in and outside of the inventory, no problem whatsoever. So that is the method where I said, okay, we're just gonna ignore how this works, and we're just gonna take it on good authority that this works because it's a little too complicated. But yeah, that's amazing. Right, and we have finally made it. So to reiterate once more, this cheat sheet, of course, available for download in the description below. This can be really useful to sort of, understand at least a little bit of what is going on here. And I hope that I've been able to sort of condense the information well enough for you to understand it. I still agree that it's still really complicated, so there's no way around this. It's simply because this is a quite complicated topic. However, once you've mastered it, adding new tile entities is actually going to be fairly straightforward. Once you know this, you can of course also copy over some of the methods and some of the things that you've already done because they are quite similar most of the time. If you run into any issues, of course, you can always leave a comment. There's going to be a few issues that can be solved fairly easily. One of them is create a new world. So if you are continuing to test the tile entity and it still doesn't work and it still doesn't work and then it actually works, create a new world. It can be kind of annoying to create a new world every time you try to change something. That is one of the solutions that you can try. Right, apart from that, of course, you have access to the GitHub repository, so you can compare your code and the code here. You can also get the individual classes as gists in the description below. And that would be it for this tutorial right here. I genuinely hope you found this useful and you learned something new. It was, of course, quite a road, but we've made it. So I think that it's time to congratulate us. And if this was helpful to you, I would very much appreciate a like from you. And of course, don't forget to subscribe for more tutorials just like this. And I will see you in the next tutorial. So, yeah.